Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to version 7 of my many-to-many train system. This video is where you'll find the changelog as well as the link to the blueprints. And I will give you a short overview of why you want to use the system and the differences in version 7 compared to version 6. So, why do you even want to use the system? If you've been around previously in version 6 or earlier, you already know the story of why you made these things, and I just reiterate for those who are new. First of all, welcome. Hope you like it. And the reason why I built this in the first place is because I switched to rail towns from main bus bases. So main bus, as many of you probably know, is when you pipe all your resources that you need in most places through a big bus in the middle of your base, and then you feed into and take out of that bus depending on what you need where. And essentially your entire factory is centered around that bus. Railtown maps are about building every item in the game in their own outpost and using trains to essentially replace the main bus base, the main bus, and handling the logistics through the trains. I chose to go with railtown maps because I got bored of main bus bases. Even if they're nice and easy and ordered and everything, I just preferred something different. The issue is, of course, that you have to build hundreds of outposts because there's hundreds of items in the game. Most people solve this by building dedicated builder trains, and it usually means that you have one or more relatively long trains, and you go into each wagon and you reserve each slot based on what you want on the train. And I mean, that's fine, right? But I wanted something a little bit more complex. I wanted something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit weirder, a little bit more gimmicky. So I decided to build my own builder train system. And what I ended up with after several versions is one that is very reliable and that can load a 4-wagon train with any number of materials in exactly the layout that I wanted to be loaded in. Well, I mean per wagon, not within the wagon, that's still random. The way it basically works is I have this player's depot over here. I have two versions, the big and the small. My train comes in, it receives a command on what to load it, bots deliver the items, the train gets loaded, the station checks whether or not the load is correct, and if it is, I can send for trains, for a number of trains of that loadout. The train leaves, the counter ticks down, and as long as I still have a positive counter, the next train gets loaded and gets also sent on its way, and so on until I'm down at a 0. And over here, I have a maintenance part, which is basically mostly automated. In each outpost, I can give it a loadout that I want that particular outpost to be maintained with, and then its train can come to the depot and get itself restocked and go back to the outpost once it has everything it needs. And this is basically the maintenance part. It's also an artillery train, so every outpost has its own artillery train basically. The outposts are so there's 2 steps, step 1 and step 2. Step 1 is for the seed, you could say, and step 2 is to complete the outpost. And again, on the left part, I have the builder train part. This is the part that you interact with to get the items that you need to build the rest of your outpost and the stations and whatever you want. And on the right side is the maintenance part, and this is the artillery train. And each train is dedicated to one station, and each station comes with exactly one train. You don't want to mix and match there. And my resource system is also fairly smart. You don't have trains that are locked to move between specific stations. Instead, they're locked to a specific resource. So a train may serve iron ore, but not any other resource at a time. And the trains will move between the iron ore stations, the loading and unloading stations, based on those demand levels. So a station that can serve many trains will get more trains than a station that cannot serve as many trains. This is basically the decentralized part of my resource system, of my many-to-many resource system. Of course, the same is also true for the fluid part. The differences to version 6 are mostly centered around the resource system. So in one of the more recent patches, we've got these two new functions, read stop train and read train count, and these include trains that are still on the way to the station. And that is very handy because it allows me to remove several key components of version 6 that made life kind of difficult. Version 6 was very much functional, but it had a lot of potential for user error, and that's almost entirely gone now. So you see, I used to have this thing down here. This used to be a dummy station, and those dummy stations had to be there because if they weren't, trains could actually just no path in the middle of the train network if the relevant resource stations turned themselves off for some reason. And so long as I had these dummy stations, the trains would keep moving and would just basically wait outside the station until the station re-enables itself. That's gone now. I don't need these dummy stations anymore. There is already more than one source of user errors gone. And I also didn't have mandatory train yards in version 6. Instead, I had internal stackers to each station, or well, sort of internal stations, but basically the approach had a stacker and the outgoing trains also waited in a stacker. And there was also a lot of stuff here that you needed to know and naming and stuff. So that's another source of user error that's essentially gone now. Everything has become a lot safer, a lot simpler. However, whereas I used to have these stackers, instead I now have central train yards where these are dedicated also to the resource. So each stacker serves one resource. They do not mix and match. And there is a little bit to know here. So this is a source of user error that I didn't have before, but it is not as big as the internal stackers. And if you just do it once correctly, it's an easy to find error if you mess up, because it's kind of central in the train yard, right? It's an easy place to look, and if you fix it once, you fix it forever, so to say. And you, this I'll go into on what exactly you do here. That's what I'll go into in depth later. But let's just say it's a lot easier to use now, and it's a lot safer to use too. And the fact that it is mandatory now compared to before means that you will always have your train yard if you need to clean up traffic jams. I used to make the experience of not having train yards because I didn't actually need them. So when I ended up in a situation where I could really use train yards, I didn't have any, and I either had to go about building any or had to figure out another way to solve the problem. Now that train yards are mandatory, otherwise the new system just doesn't work. You need these stops in between, otherwise trains can tend to get stuck in the middle of the rail network and cause traffic jams. Now that these are mandatory, it's actually another source of problems gone. So I find that version 7 is just all around more reliable. Although version 6 was no slouch, it just was easier to fuck up if you didn't know what you were doing. Right. I think that's actually it. I don't think I need to say any more. I thank you for watching, and the next video will be about the scripts, because those are still there. Quick word on that, I guess. Version 7 has so that the big version at least has the providers built in. That's something that you need to know if you use multiple depots for whatever reason. You have to delete this, and you have to delete these combinators up here. Except for one of the depots, every global network has these ones, and I've decided in version 7 I'm not going to ask you to remember to add these manually. I mean, you would probably be reminded by your system not working, but I'll just add these automatically. But if you want more than one depot in a global network, you need to remove these in the extra ones. The small version of the depot, so this one size-wise still fits in the same square as the outposts. This one has its own square. This is the square for the big one. This is the square for the small one. This one has the memory for the trains, but it does not have the global providers. Those don't fit anywhere. Those need to be put externally. So you'd have them maybe out here or somewhere outside of the actual depot, basically. Slight downsize to the size, but they just don't fit anymore anywhere. I have to do some major refactoring to fit those in. Yep, that really is it. Thank you for watching.